guess I would accept that premise that jazz was the soundtrack for American culture. Growing up when I was young, I was influenced by jazz musicians. They were free, they were dashing, they were world travelers, they had wonderful stories to tell. I had several jazz musicians in my family that were cousins, so they were kind of held up to me as heroes. Some of them that I met, some of them I only knew about. But that music was a big part of my early life. One of my cousins had a picture in his basement that I never forgot. And it was a huge picture that had, I think the theme of the picture was women, wine, and music seen through the eyes of the world. And there were beautiful exotic women. There was a picture of the Eiffel Tower. There was foods and plates and kind of a surrealistic landscape. And as a young person in high school, I wanted to travel and see the world, and music and media and entertainment was a vehicle that I chose. So throughout my life, I guess jazz was my personal soundtrack. One of my first musicians that really influenced me was Charles Lloyd. He wasn't as well known, he wasn't famous, he played pretty melodic music. He was a saxophone player and flute. So when I was young, that was the music that you went out and had your girlfriends with. You sat in front of the fireplace. You know, that's kind of cool jazz at the time. Then when I got, I guess, matured beyond Charles Lloyd, I liked Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington, I later found out in life that I was a distant cousin of Duke Ellington.
Oh, wow.
And Duke Ellington was the consummate gentleman. I mean, he was dashing, he was debonair, he was elegant, he was a world traveler, he was very prestigious, so a lot of class and glamour. So Duke Ellington was one of my favorites. I loved Miles Davis. Miles Davis was the innovator to me, that he went through all the progressions of cool and bebop jazz and his suits to, you know, his Jimi Hendrix phase where he wore the wild leather suits and experimented with electronic music, and had a lot of young people in this band, which kept him alive and fresh. I would say the other person that influenced me a lot was Sun Ra. And Sun Ra was kind of in between Miles Davis and Duke Ellington. He came from the big band background where he played, you know, all the classical jazz music, but he also was the first performer that had a theme beyond just showmanship behind his performance. He was very much into outer space and Egyptology, so that was his backdrop of what he did and how he presented himself. So Sun Ra also represented freedom to me. I suspect a lot of people had a hard time understanding and valuing Sun Ra because he wasn't really a mainstream jazz person. People either loved Sun Ra or they hated him. His biggest following was really, he was a cult figure among college students, you know, young hippies. He was a superstar in Europe. He wasn't as widely appreciated in the United States, particularly among African-American audiences, because he just was too far out for them. I think jazz in general was really supported in this country primarily by the wealthy, the elite, the adventurers. So when Sun Ra performed, most of his audiences were really white. They weren't black audiences. But Sun Ra definitely was an icon of this music, and he influenced so many people. He was a mentor and a teacher to many jazz musicians like John Coltrane. People that commercialized Sun Ra's, I would say, performance was George Clinton with the Funkadelics, with the spaceship and the costumes. He was a Sun Ra clone. Pink Floyd, George Harrison, Art Blakey, Max Roach, the Mothers of Invention. All these folks are really studying Sun Ra and really spinning off of him. I had a good friend that was a bass player. He played stand-up acoustic bass. And he was going on a European tour with Sun Ra in 1976, and he approached me because Sun Ra was putting together a band and needed a photographer. And because Sun Ra, again, wasn't your average everyday person, you had to be a special kind of person to bond with the band and go on that kind of trip. So he approached me and talked to me, and he took me to Philadelphia to meet Sun Ra. Sun Ra had a big old house in Philadelphia. A lot of the band members lived in, and I guess I passed the test of being a young cosmic cadet. So I passed the test, and next thing I knew, I was going to Europe with Sun Ra in the summer of 1976. And I took a lot of pictures. I did audio sound checks for the band, played them back with Sun Ra. He believed that music was really the common universal language. And when he performed, his music transcended all cultures. He played jazz, rock, classical, bebop, rock and roll, Brazilian, Mexican, native music. So his orchestra was literally, I think, what he believed in. He went around the world with his music orchestra, you know, kind of saving souls and preaching his humanity. And Sun Ra was a poet and a philosopher as well. It's hard to quote Sun Ra. And Sun Ra was Sun Ra 24 hours a day. It's like some entertainers and musicians, they come on stage, have the
Right.
stage performance. Sun Ra was Sun Ra, on stage, off stage. He never changed, so he really just was himself all the time. He always tried to keep some mystery about his whole life, but I think people said Sun Ra was born in the South. I'm not sure if it was Mississippi, Alabama. I think he was a child prodigy with music when he was in high school. I think at some point later in his life, I think he did go to Alabama State and had some formal musical training. And I think when he went to Chicago with Fletcher Henderson, that was his, entree into the, I guess, the big jazz scene. And the Midwest was, I would say that, a lot of people say that the birthplace of jazz was New Orleans, but I would probably say that the dawn of jazz was probably Chicago. So Chicago, I think, was where Sun Ra came of age and developed his own personality. Growing up as a person of color in the United States, you were always dealt with freedom and opportunities and travel. So to have men of color that were free, that had an impact upon society, that had dignity and respect, it made a big difference in my life, how I carried myself, a lot of the dreams that I had, things I wanted to do, and made me feel like I could accomplish almost anything I wanted to do because I had role models that would do that. And Sun Ra was a poet and a philosopher. Sun Ra never got rich, so unlike the young, entertainers of today, but I would say that he influenced a lot of people and a lot of mainstream things that people aren't consciously aware of. So he definitely had a strong impact on this music that we